Have you ever had a moment in your life whenever your past caught up to you and revisited you? I think we all have. When I was in high school, my dad sent me and another high schooler named Brad Cornelson to go get a John Deere lawnmower that was in a different part of the farm because there was a patch of grass at our house that had become overgrown, and he needed the John Deere. I guess nothing runs like a deer. And so we set out and we went over to go get this thing, and we took Brad's pickup. It was a short bed pickup, and so when we got there, we loaded it up. This lawnmower, I mean, it barely fit in his bed of his truck, to the point to where we laid the tailgate down, and the wheels were on the very edge of the tailgate. Well, I was kind of nervous about that, and so I jumped up there and I set the parking brake. I thought I did, anyway. We did not use any straps, and incidentally, we did not use any brains in this operation either. And so I decided to start going down the road, and me and Brad were doing a responsible 60 miles an hour down this dirt road. And I looked at Brad and I said, "Brad, if that thing fell out of there, I would laugh my rear off." Those words were still in the air when all of a sudden we felt a jolt and heard a thud. And I looked back, and there was no lawnmower in there. It was now chasing us. It was bouncing on that dirt road, and it was driving as if it was pursuing us, doing 60 miles an hour. We couldn't slow down or else it was going to hit us. It was like a possessed piece of farm equipment out of a horror movie. And it was just bouncing. Well, it decided to take a turn, and it turned hard to the right. And when it did, it hit the ditch, and it just launched into the air. For a brief moment, the surrounding farmers in the area could have seen a John Deere green aircraft flying peacefully and quietly through the air. And it made a landing, a perfect, hard but perfect 4-point landing, boom, right into a plowed field, and the dust up was quite significant. And meanwhile, I was not laughing my rear off. I was very nervous and scared that this thing was just going to be a pile of green scrap metal. We went over there to it, and as I was walking up to it, it looked pretty okay. And when I inspected it, all I saw that was wrong with it was a missing tail light on the back left of it. That's all I could see. Well, we pushed it to his pickup, and we rolled it up again, and we got it in there, and this time we made for sure that we set the parking brake, and we made it to my house. But then we had to unload it, and then the real test came. When we turned the key, would it run? We turned that key, and it fired right up and just mowed like a champ. I mean, nothing runs like a deer, right? I thought that was all that there was to it until many years later. My grandpa had moved that lawnmower to his lake house in Missouri. And we were standing in his shop one day, and we happened to be over there by that lawnmower, and he said, "Brian, do you happen to know anything about," and he pointed to that missing tail light. And I said, "Grandpa, if you only knew." And of course, I told him the flying John Deere the flying John Deere tractor story, and he was not laughing his rear off either. He whooped me up pretty bad that day. Guys, I want to tell you something. Sometimes the past that we think is gone, the past that we have left, sometimes it comes back into our lives. Sometimes it doesn't stay there, right? We like to believe that time erases things, and that if enough time goes by, we can just move on, and if we ignore it long enough, that our past stays in the past. But the question is, what if it doesn't? We're in a series right now called Curveball, and this is the story of Joseph. And as you know, in his life, he gets curveball after curveball after curveball. And we're at this point of the story right now where all the past, all the sin, all the crud that his brothers put him through is now going to come back in their lives and in his life. When they thought, the brothers, when they thought that they had moved on, it has now been 20 years. Think about what has happened in your life 20 years ago. And they thought that he was dead and long gone, and there's no way that they would ever see him again, and they had moved on. And then for Joseph, This atrocity happened to him 20 years ago, and all the pain and the hurt that he's had to deal with. Hopefully by this point he's been able to move on. But what happens when all of that comes back into the brother's face and into Joseph's face? Now, if you were here last week in the story of Joseph, you know that right now that there's a massive famine going on in Egypt and all the Middle East. There's a big famine that is involving several countries and lots of different nations happening. And they're 2 years into that 7-year famine. And so if you got your Bibles, I want you to open up to Genesis chapter 42. That's what we're going to be at right today. And if you don't have one, there's a Bible in front of you, or we'll put it up in the screen. But Genesis chapter 42, start there in verse 1. I think it's so funny what Jacob says to his other 11 sons here. He says this: when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued. "I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." I mean, how many of us have said to our kids, just sitting there isn't going to solve your problem, right? You got to get up and you got to do something. You got to get up off the couch and go do something. Now, you're going to remember that there was 12 sons here. 12 sons. But Joseph is assumed dead, right? So now there are 11. But Jacob does not send all 11. He only sends 10. Why? The baby of the family, the last born, was Benjamin. Now that Joseph is not there anymore, Benjamin now becomes his favorite, because Benjamin was the other son of his favorite wife. Okay, so lots going on here. Okay. So now he's not only his favorite son because it's his favorite wife, but he's also the baby. So he's like, you 10, you go. Benjamin, you stay with me. I don't want anything happening to Benjamin. So he only sends 10. Now, pick it up in verse 6. In 42:6, he says, "Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him and their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger, and he spoke harshly to them. 'Where do you come from?' he asked. 'From the land of Canaan,' they replied, 'to buy food.' Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him." Now, guys, let's put a pause right there, because there's something significant happening with this word, recognized. This is a big word in Genesis. It's the Hebrew word nakar, and it only shows up in Genesis just a handful of times. But every single time it shows up, there's something significant happening here. The very first time that we see nakar, or recognize, happen is all the way back in Genesis chapter 27. Right? And this is where Jacob, he is involved in this. Okay? He steals his brother Esau's blessing by, if you remember the story, his brother Esau was a hairy man. Okay? And Jacob had smooth skin. And so he went in there to steal his father's blessing. His father had poor eyesight. He was an old man, and so he thought, I can deceive him. And so he put animal fur on his hands and his arms. And he went in there, and the text says, for he did not recognize him, for his brother Esau had hairy hands and arms. And so therefore he blessed him. And that right there starts the first domino of deception and hurt in this family that he did not recognize. Now, Jacob is the deceiver, but the next time that word shows up is 10 chapters later in Genesis chapter 37. And now Jacob is the one that's being deceived, and that's when they stripped Joseph of his robe, and they put animal blood on it, and then they went back, and they didn't say, hey, he died. They never said that. They just handed it to Jacob, and they said, Jacob, do you recognize this? Do you nakar this? And it's interesting, isn't it, that Jacob's past deception has now come back to haunt him. Now he's the one being deceived by his own sons. Do you recognize this? And he says, yes, I do. This is my son, Joseph's. He must have been killed. The next time we see it is just a wild story in the next chapter, in chapter 38. Guys, this is a weird chapter. And honestly, it makes it seem like this chapter is out of place, because in chapter 38, we depart from the story of Joseph, and Joseph is not mentioned at all. We go to Judah, one of his brothers. Judah was interesting because it was Judah's idea to sell Jacob. Okay, it was awful, right? It was his idea. And so this story, this whole chapter is about Judah. Judah moves away. There's a rift in the family. He moves away to the land of Canaan, and he marries a Canaanite woman, has children, and he starts a life. His son, his oldest son, he dies. Now he leaves a widow. In that culture, women had a hard time making a life by themselves, and so they needed the protection of a man. And so it was cultural at that time that if her husband died, that one of his brothers would give her a son. Let's just say it that way, right? Give her a son so that she would have a son to help take care of her. Judah refuses. He does not give Tamar, this girl, his other son. And he says to her, he says, he's too young. I'm just going to hold him for a second, for a little while. You go back and live with your father. So she does, right? But Judah, he's not doing what's right. Judah's wife dies later, and he's on a trip. Tamar realizes that he has not done what he is supposed to. He said that he would give her his other son, but he never did. So she takes off her widow clothes. She dresses up as a prostitute, and he sees her, and he lays with her not knowing who she was. For payment, she takes his staff and his cord. That's what he paid her. She becomes pregnant with his child. Okay? Weird story, I know. But he finds out that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, is now pregnant, and he knows that she's not married. He didn't know it's his child. And so what is his reaction to that? Harsh. He says, burn her alive. Kind of a double standard there, isn't it? Burn her alive. And whenever they bring her out to be burned, she says, hold on a second, what do you think it is? Recognize, do you nakar this? And Joseph has this moment in the text that will come back later. He repents. He changes. And he says, he doesn't double down and say, no, I don't know what that is. Burn her. He doesn't do that. He repents and he says, she is more righteous than I. Her name means righteous. And he begins to change. The next time and the last time we see this word nakar is right here in the text in chapter 42 today. And Joseph nakars, he recognizes his brothers. But his brothers don't nakar, they don't recognize him. Joseph recognizes the pain. He recognizes all the hurt that has happened in life. They don't recognize it. They don't see what their sin has rippled out to do. They don't understand it. Their eyes haven't been opened yet, but they will. And so here in chapter 42, it says that they don't recognize it. But then look in chapter 42, verse 9. Look in the first part of verse 9. It says this, then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. But look at what they say. They replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and the one is no more. Now, the one that was no more is standing right in front of him. And they have no idea what's going on here. Now, if you were Joseph, wouldn't you be interested in the one that was no more? Wouldn't you say, tell me more about the one what happened to him? Did you like him? Was he a good brother? You know, it sounds like he was pretty awesome. I don't know, right? But He wants to know not about what they think about him, but he wants to know about his brother Benjamin, the one that didn't come. Why? Why is he so interested in Benjamin? Well, that was his only full-blooded brother. Their mom, Rachel, died whenever she was giving birth to Benjamin. And Joseph was probably only about 8 years old. So they grew up without a mother. All those other sons, the other 10, they all had a mother. So whenever their birthdays rolled around, whenever there's holidays and feasts rolled around, they all had a mother, but those two did not. You have to know that they were probably bonded and closer than any of the other siblings because of that right there. And so no wonder he wants to see his brother Benjamin. But before any of that, before he sends them back to go get Benjamin, he has a wrestling match in his own heart. And Joseph is going to be confronted with, what is he going to do with the brothers? What is he going to do? The question that he must answer is this: whose son is he? Is he the son of Pharaoh now? Has he left that family? And is he a son of Pharaoh? Will he turn his back on his family like they turned their back on him? And will he pay them back for their sin? Or is he still a son of Jacob? Are these guys still his brothers, even though they treated him as an enemy? And he eventually sends them back to go get Benjamin, but he keeps one as collateral, Simeon, the second oldest. Now, one of my favorite parts of this story is what happens whenever the brothers go back. They return and give Jacob the bad news, and they say to him, hey, look, he found out that we have another brother named Benjamin, and he wants to meet him. He wants proof that we were telling the truth. Okay? And he made us leave Simeon as collateral. He's in jail right now. He's in prison right now. Well, guess what Jacob is going to say to that? He says, no, I'm not sending Benjamin. That's messed up. Can you agree that Simeon, one of his other sons, is in prison? Simeon at this point has a family. He has children of his own and a wife, and he's got and he says, no, he's kind of naughty. Gets annoying to me. I'm not gonna, I don't know. But he says, I'd rather give up Simeon than even take the risk of losing Benjamin. Jacob, we're not nominating you for Father of the Year here, okay? This is messed up. But he is firm about this, and he says, no way, I'm not doing it. Now look in verse 37 of chapter 42. There's something really interesting happened. It says, then Reuben, who is Reuben? I know, guys, there's a lot of names, just keep with me, okay? Reuben says to him, and Reuben is the oldest. He's the firstborn. He has this place as the firstborn, and he is supposed to be in charge, but he's not, because he messed up bad. Early in the story, he went to bed with one of Jacob's concubines. That's weird and a huge no-no, and ever since then, he was not in that position. They had a name for that position. It was called the Bakor, right? And so he lost his position as the Bakor. And so now it was supposed to be Simeon, but now Simeon's locked up in jail. And so who is going to do this? So Reuben, he wants to become that back in his father's eyes, but his past keeps coming up, and his choices ripple down the road. And he says to his father, he says, let me take charge here. And look what it says. Then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death. I hope they weren't there in earshot. You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. And what does Jacob say to that? No, thank you. No way. I'm not doing it. It's interesting, right? Like, Reuben makes an offering of his own sons to Jacob, as if killing his own grandsons was going to make anything any better, So he says no. But look what happens next. Enter into the story again, Judah. Judah comes back, and look what happens. Look in chapter 43, verse 8. Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. What does he say? I what? Myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." There's a fundamental difference in what Reuben offered and what Judah offered. Reuben says to Jacob, "You can kill my sons." He makes an offering to him. But Judah, he offers something totally different. He says, "You can have me." And he puts himself on the line. Judah doesn't offer his children. He offers himself as a substitutionary payment for sin. Little side note. What tribe do you think Jesus come from? Judah. Where he would ultimately sacrifice himself for sin. He offers himself. And so in this moment we find out that not only is Joseph trying to figure out who he is, Judah is also trying to figure out who he is. Will he be redeemed? And he does. Because at the end of this, Joseph agrees. He finally agrees. He says, okay. And it was that moment that changed Jacob's mind. But there's something interesting that happens here. If you look in the story in chapter 42, verse 38, it says, "But Jacob said," right? And did you notice that the name changed? It went from Jacob, and then if you go down to chapter 43, verse 6, it says, "Israel asked." Why did it change? Why does it use two different names for Jacob, right? It's actually meaning to capture something here. When the text uses Jacob's name, it is in the moments that he is acting from his earthly nature, from his human nature of fear and a need to be in control, right? But then after Judah offers himself, Judah elevates Jacob from being just Jacob to Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. And he plays the role that God had been longing for him to play. A faith in God and what he was doing in the midst of the fear, in the midst of not knowing, not being able to control what was going on. The question is, who is Jacob? Will he be Jacob or will he ascend to Israel? So they go back to Egypt with Benjamin. When they get back to Egypt, Joseph has some exchanges with his brothers. He's talking with his brothers. And they still don't know that it's Joseph. They have no idea that it's him that we're talking to. And we find that Joseph is extremely emotional. He keeps running out of the room inexplicably to everybody else so that he can cry by himself. Right? He's having this war within himself. Who is he going to be? Is he going to pay them back? Is he going to get revenge on them? Or is he going to forgive them? And he is faced with the question of forgiveness. Look in chapter 45, verse 1. It says this, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, 'Have everyone leave my presence.' So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph.'" Can you imagine the chill that ran down their spine? "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." come close to me. What is the last thing that they probably wanted to do in that moment? Is come close to him. You know, when we wrong somebody, the last thing we want to do is be near them. When we wrong somebody, we want to get out of there. But he says, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt. He doesn't let them off the hook. He tells them, you hurt me. And what is Joseph going to do in this moment? Who is he? Will he forgive? Can he forgive? You know, Joseph has two things that we don't often have. He has the right for revenge. Right? He has the right. And he also has the opportunity. Sometimes we have the right? And sometimes they did real wrong to us, but a lot of times, sometimes we don't have the opportunity. Sometimes we have the opportunity, but we probably don't have the right. We were probably part to blame in this. But he has both. He has the right, and he has the opportunity. What is he going to do? Look, in verse 5, in chapter 45, verse 5, he says, and now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For he forgives. And in doing so, he elevates to a Christ-like status. He could have taken the natural road of revenge, but instead he ascends to a place that God calls every single one of us. And this message, man, it hits every single one of us because we all struggle with forgiveness. Every single one of us has been hurt by someone. And some of us have been hurt deeply and profoundly. And the first question that comes to mind is this: what do we need to recognize? Our choices, for good or bad, they ripple into our future. And in the end, our choices do come back. Eventually, they come back. Maybe there's something in your past, something that you've done, something that was done to you, that you tried to forget, you tried to ignore it, or you tried to move past. But what if God is bringing it back up, not to condemn you, but to redeem it? Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. They didn't recognize the consequences. They didn't recognize the pain that they had caused. And the same can be true in our own lives. We might downplay what we did. We might justify what we did or excuse the past sin. But unresolved sin still leaves a ripple effect in our lives and in other people's lives. Is there something in your life that you need to acknowledge before God? Is there something in your life that you just need to reckon with God and just take full ownership of it? Is there a relationship that remains broken because you haven't faced the truth? And the other one is this, and I'm going to skip the middle one, Jeremy, but the other one is this: will you choose redemption over retribution? Will you choose redemption over retribution? Joseph had both the right and the opportunity to get revenge, but he chose forgiveness. You might say this, though. You might say, hey man, that's great for Joseph. But you do not know what they did to me. You don't know how much they hurt me. Man, I want to say, if you've thought that, and if you had these thoughts that you could not forgive somebody, I just want to say this, that you are not crazy. Pain has a way of clouding our vision, clouding our eyes to see any kind of future forgiveness. It's hard to see a future of forgiveness whenever we are in deep, deep pain. One of my friends from Indiana lost a grandson a couple years ago to a drunk driver. Both him and his girlfriend were killed on a road, senseless, pointless. It was just stupid. she was incredibly close with this grandson. And she has been in grief ever since. She has been overcome and overwhelmed with grief, and she posts about it regularly, her grief. And a couple weeks ago, I saw her post this image right here. And it said this: "Forgiveness is not a necessary part of the healing process," said Bear. "It is only necessary that you heal in your own way and your own time." And when she posted that picture, she also wrote this. She said, "I will never be able to forgive the punk who killed our Bryce and Abby. If he ever showed any remorse for what he did, then maybe. But he does not." Man, I want to say this. I appreciate the idea that healing is a personal journey, and I appreciate the idea that healing takes time. But I also know that forgiveness is crucial to healing. That there is no healing without forgiveness. That without it, we may move forward, but we often carry the weight of bitterness and anger and pain with us. If we continue to judge, if we are unable and unwilling to let go of it, and we carry that judgment and that hate, it will burden us and it will change us. My friend has made her forgiveness tied to his behavior. Sometimes the problem is the people who hurt us are not going to change. Sometimes they'll never be sorry for what they did. Sometimes they'll never think that it was wrong. Forgiveness must be a choice before it's a feeling. Because sometimes you're not going to feel it. Maybe you'll never feel it. But that's why forgiveness is not a feeling first. It's a choice first. Forgiveness is not letting them off the hook or excusing them for what they did, because forgiveness is not about them. Forgiveness is about you and your heart. Forgiveness is allowing yourself to let the judgment go and allow God to deal with it. We have a running illustration of forgiveness in my home. One night, my wife made some sweet tea, and we had a contest of who could hold the tea out the longest. And so we all had a contest, and we all timed each other, and we're all standing there. And at first, it's fairly easy. It's not hard. It's only a couple pounds. But as time goes on, this couple pounds turns into 1,000 pounds, and it becomes very, very heavy. And of course, everybody went, and had their turn, and of course, I destroyed everybody in the family. Let's be honest. But after that, we set the tea back down on the table, and I said, "This is unforgiveness. This is exactly what unforgiveness does to us." And I told him, I said, at first, whenever somebody does you wrong, it almost feels right, not to forgive them. It would almost feel wrong just to quickly forgive them. And it's easy to stand there and hold hate. It's easy to stand there and hold a grudge. It's not hard at all. But man, the longer you hold it out, the more it hurts. And I want to tell you something. The longer you hold this out, the more it changes you. You cannot harbor hate in your heart for very long without it changing your heart. And after a while, this thing becomes heavy, heavy, heavy. Guys, I want to tell you, forgiveness is a choice to set it down. And man, I want to tell you something. You're going to have to say it out loud. I forgive, fill in the blank. Because you're not going to feel it at first. You're going to have to say it out loud again the next day, aren't you? Because you're not going to feel it the next day. I want to tell you something. Say it out loud every single day if you need to. Because eventually, what's here will move to here. I promise you. It may take a long time, but it will get there. I promise you, I promise you. And when you set that down, you are paving the way for love to enter back into your heart. You are paving the way for those ripple effects. That choice to set it down will have ripple effects into your future if you will let it go and let God deal with it. And so you've got to say out loud, I forgive them. I forgive them. And in the end, isn't it us that have to figure out who we are? You know, I love the fact that Jesus offers us forgiveness and that He didn't wait until we had changed. He didn't wait until we were sorry for what we did. He didn't wait for me to turn around my life. He forgave me before I was even ready to be forgiven. And when He forgives you, your sin is not nakar anymore. It is not recognized. Psalm 103:12 says, as far as the east is from the west, so far as He removed our transgression from us. Listen, if you have never given your life to Jesus and you want to accept His forgiveness, do that today as we learn to go down the road and forgive others. Let me pray.